Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami. Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. I go for refuge in the Buddha. I go for refuge in the Dharma. I go for refuge in the Sangha. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami. Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. We'll start with our 15 minutes of seated meditation. We'll recite the Gatha on opening the sutras. This Dharma, incomparably profound and minutely subtle, is rarely encountered even in hundreds of thousands of millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, hold and maintain it. May we completely realize the true mind of all Buddhas. Okay, so something a little bit different tonight. And Dayan, I'm going to ask that you turn on your light, please. So, or you can disappear altogether, as the case may be. Ah, there we go. Nice. So a while ago, we did something called the Zen Game Show. Tonight, we're going to do something called Zen Talking Heads. And if you have ever seen any of those Sunday morning piles of pundits, and I do mean to use the word piles, everybody, chats up everything they think about some topic or other, and a lot of times they step on each other. So hopefully we'll be a little bit more better behaved tonight, let's say, and not like stomp on each other while we're answering these things. So I have a number of questions, and I will pose them. I'm going to set a 15-minute timer, and hopefully we'll, stay somewhere in that vicinity. If you can keep your answers succinct and on topic, that would be wonderful. But as I said, since it's Zen Talking Heads, that may or may not happen. So here we are with our new edition of Zen Talking Heads. We have three panelists tonight. Robert Coho Epstein, Wayne Dayan, Bivens Tatum, and Briar Hengdal Chita. And I have some questions, and I'm going to ask them to provide their answers to this question. So, question one. What is Western Zen?
All right, I'll jump right in.
Thank you.
Zen has evolved everywhere it has gone around the world and taken on local flavors as it adapts the medicine to suit the sickness, which can vary in different cultural appurtenances, lineages, or situations while remaining true to the essence and spirit of Zen. Western Zen is a work in progress, still being adapted to the oddities of Western culture and translation of Eastern philosophy.
Thank you. Who else would like to weigh in on that? What is Western Zen?
I'll jump in. I would just say that everything that Hangdal said was great. And I would just add that I think it's a really interesting and unique characteristic. Three things about Western Zen that's a little bit different than the older traditions. That is a much more of an emphasis in Western Zen on lay practice and the integration of Zen practice into everyday life and ordinary social situations. Two, the role of women becoming much more prominent and taking leadership roles, which didn't exist in the old schools. And that's changed the flavor of Zen, I think, in a more well-rounded way. And three, the parallel development of Zen in the West and modern psychology, which have had some ways of informing each other, so that some of the schools anyway, particularly the lay schools, include more of the work on getting through personal obstacles and working with the self as opposed to just abnegating it. Thank you.
Very good. And Reverend Dayan, how about you?
Oh, well, I will agree with everything that has been said so far, and I will add that Western Zen is ironically the best contemporary instantiation of a Western wisdom tradition leading from Socrates down to the present, and the ancient Greek philosophical philosophy as a way of life, in that it not only has the ethical, psychological, epistemological, metaphysical thought behind it, but it also is a place where people of like minds can congregate together and discuss such things, which is unusual for Western philosophy, but is Zen. And because it's Western Zen, it has that entire tradition behind it, plus an Eastern tradition of philosophy that is coalesced into one modern school.
Wow, thank you all.
Can I throw another comment in?
Sure.
This is bouncing off of what Wayne said. It struck me that the Socratic dialogues, where Socrates would try to test and draw out a response on some aspect of truth from the person he was talking to through questioning, has some parallel similarity to the way that that Chan and Zen masters would ask questions to either the groups or individuals that they were working with to test their understanding and also to bring them further along in the path of insight.
Sort of like this. Is it different from Asian Zen? And is one more legitimate than the other?
Yes, no.
Moo or ack.
Don't know, and all dichotomies are false dichotomies.
Very good. You're all very good Zen students, apparently. Okay, now into something a little bit more granular. What about lineages? Do you think they're important? Are they even real?
I think there's a substantial question going back historically about many lineages, and many of the old schools were challenged at some point or another for having artificially created them in one way or another. Some schools, of course, their origins are somewhat apocryphal. That being said, there's probably some legitimacy to it, talking about that third leg of the stool that you just rode on, or legitimizing a student-teacher relationship and an ability to carry on the teaching, that there be a continuity where somebody is working with another person or a group of people to establish they sort of maybe kind of know what they are or are not talking about, versus just going online and starting a Sangha and saying, hey, I'm going to teach you Zen, but it might not really be Zen.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. Robert, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I personally have a very a strangely strong attachment to lineage for someone who doesn't really know or follow rituals and rites very closely, and doesn't have most of the trappings or accoutrements of someone who is a formal Zen person. But the actual lineage of being able to look back at the line of masters and teachers that led up to what you are practicing and feel a kinship and affiliation and a sense of inheriting what they have passed on is extremely important to me. The most important part of lineage, though, is that I think it's, at Hangdal, Breyer mentioned that the legitimacy of the teaching being handed on directly from somebody who has experienced it to somebody who is practicing it, so that they can approach it correctly and, not just get some pseudo or intellectual version of it. And, whatever the lineage is, whether it's Rinzai or Soto or one of the Korean schools, each has their own methodology, but each one of them has that connection from one person to the next all the way down the line.
And Dayan, how
Well,
about you?
I would agree completely with the continuity, and the passing on from teacher to student is absolutely crucial. And if you need the feeling of being part of a tradition, then the lineage is important. But at a certain point, it might seem just like a raft that you can abandon once you get to the other shore.
I've always thought of lineage as being important in that you're not a charlatan. Like
Hmm.
you could look up your pedigree papers and see that you actually, are a pure breed, as it were. So Robert brought up something that I'd like to go into now. How about rituals and ceremonies and defined practice forms? Do they matter?
Yes. I think that there's always a question, and again, depending on your view or your school of Zen, on how much is maybe putting the energy out there, which energy never stops, versus establishing the practice. But ritual, at the very least, at the lowest common denominator, establishes a basis for the discipline of settling in, focusing, and in the case of a sangha, having that community experience of practicing together with that portion of the refuge. Whereas my experience has been, when you do away with all ritual because you say, oh, it's not real anyway, there's no real prayer or whatever some Zen schools might say, you do away with the commonality of practice, you do away with the discipline, and you find, anything goes. We'll chew crunchy granola and meditate later.
Um, should I say something, or did you have something to say?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I really agree with that, and I think that some of the rituals, some of them are, and all of them potentially are meditative forms. So when they are utilized that way and seen as ways of promoting presence and mindfulness, then all of the rituals have value. My feeling, although I haven't, participated in one of the schools, it's mostly by hearsay for me, that use an enormous amount of ritual beyond what I know. That I think there's a possibility of getting lost in the minutia of many, many, many formal rituals that can overtake the school and become practicing the letter of the law instead of the spirit of the law. But if you have rituals that form a structure for practice and that remind you of the most important principles, like the things that we chant in this group, and some of the dedication of merit, and some of the reminders of what the practice is about. I think those, and especially the chanting of the Heart Sutra, I think that those are very valuable rituals or practices, and that I would definitely, value those.
Well, I would just like to speak up on behalf of Crunchy Granola, which I think is excellent. I'm sort of two minds. Mostly I look at rituals. I mean, I think somewhere the teaching is that's one of the fetters, this attachment to rites and rituals. So ultimately, I think they're not important, and yet I have a certain ritual, chants, and other things that I do every day, and it is a certain grounding in the practice. That are they important? I don't know, and yet I do them, and they help me keep me focused.
Great. I think, especially for an online setting, that we do a little bit more ritually things than a lot of people do. I've seen other sanghas that have some. I think, we're trying to replicate the in-person experience that was part of my practice in person all along, and trying to keep that sort of continuity going. And I agree with all of you that the discipline and just the grounding, the fact that it helps us take refuge in the Sangha by taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma. So, on the subject of practice forms, there are a number of forms associated with Zen. Seated meditation, walking meditation, bowing, chanting, Kangan work, Huadu. Are any of them any more valid or important from the standpoint of Zen in terms of leading to awakening and also to saving all beings?
I used to be very skeptical of some of them, and you know, a sort of probably somewhat elitist Soto origin in Theravada. Well, I'm going to jam myself into posture and sit here for an hour because that's what Zen means and that's what we do. I've adapted that viewpoint based on a combination of working with other people and trying to figure out their needs and what is helpful to them, and also with working with this Sangha and the Korean Son perspective that embraces more different Dharma gates as the one Dharma than I had experienced in some other lineages, and really looking at it and saying, well, if what this person that is needing help needs right now is to chant Amida Buddha, and that provokes a concentration, an awareness, a relief, then who am I to say, well, you're not practicing properly because you should be able to sit zazen for 40 minutes without moving. So I think there's a validity to, again, the medicine appropriate for the sickness, the teaching appropriate for the student.
Cool. Robert, you're leaning forward.
Yeah, great. It's one of my favorite subjects. You know, I've had my main training in Open Mind Zen based in Melbourne with Al Rappaport. And that is an offshoot of Miyazumi's White Plum tradition, which is an amalgam of Soto sitting and Rinzai koan practice. And by having those two together, which obviously the Sambo people as well as Miyazumi thought was a valuable combination, I've come to value both the shikantaza kind of very straight sitting, special kind of sitting, which is not sitting that's just based on concentration, but is sitting that you could say is based in being present, to put it simply for the moment, and then really working with a lot of koans. I would never want to drop either of those practices. I think that people who just sit and don't do koan work, if it's really the right practice for them, it may be extremely valuable. And the Rinzai tradition and some of the other traditions that just do koan work almost from the beginning, not quite, but do the whole system, the whole extended system is based on koan work and the koan progression. I think that's a very valuable path too. But being able to just sit without a koan and being able to really work on a koan, I think that having both of those capabilities is really of great value. So you can see what it's like to be quiet, and you can see what it's like to work on something that opens the mind. As far as Huadu goes, before I went into this school, I did a couple of years of work on Huadu remotely with a teacher. And I think it's just a great practice. I mean, for those who just do Huadu and as their practice for years and never go into koans, I think Huadu in itself can be amazingly mind-opening. And so I love all the practices, and I think they're all great.
And Dayan, how about you?
Yeah, well, I've tried many practices and many of them have been successful. But I mean, Briar's the skillful means seems important. It's what will work best for the person. But in a sense, I mean, whether they're more important, one things, all things move among and intermingle without distinction. I mean, it's whatever works.
Very Hawaiian approach there. Intermingling without hindrance.
One of my favorite poems.
As an offshoot of that, Robert was talking about things in terms of seated and kongan work. What if, out of all those forms that I mentioned, you didn't sit and you didn't do kongans, you just did bowing and chanting, or bowing and Huadu? Would you consider that legitimate Zen practice?
I think really what would matter is if the person did a practice like that with full commitment and mindfulness and were doing it in order to investigate the nature of mind or the nature of self. If they had that intention, I don't know if bowing by itself, but certainly bowing in Huadu, you know, and it's possible that it could just be bowing, but that's a little bit of a challenge for me to imagine. But if you were just doing chanting, many of the Chan masters combined chanting with the question, who's doing the chanting?
Right.
And that turns it into a Chan practice. So I really think it depends on the intentionality and whether you're really working with the mind or not.
Hengdal, how about you?
I would say that for me, it seems not as effective, but that's not a fair judgment for all people. And again, where I've changed my mind a little bit, and I had this pointed out to me at one point by Huayan, was that if you're helping all beings, and for the lay person who doesn't have the opportunity to again be this kind of American lay priest thing that we've evolved into, that their practice could be that they come and chant and bow, and that helps them to live a better way, to find Zen meditation through that form, then it's valid. That's what, you know, the masters were saying, that for the lay person, that may be the practice that's valid. Maybe not for a priest or a monk, but who are you to judge if a person finds their solace and their peace with their community through that?
A real quick one on what Briar said, just to say that I would totally agree. And if I was working with somebody who had never meditated before, the first thing I would do is try to find any meditation form, probably breathing meditation, but maybe something else that they couldn't sit and breathe without getting too distracted and upset. Meditation form that they could settle into and have as a starter form so that they would feel comfortable sitting. That would be my first goal. Chanting, whatever it might be.
Dan, what about you?
Well, I would agree. Well, this is becoming repetitious. I agree with what you guys said. I guess bowing and chanting, they aren't my things, but they're good things if they lead to more wisdom and compassion.
Robert, if you've never done 108 full prostrations in the morning, you haven't lived. Of course, the days of even 27 prostrations says that ship has sailed. But
I did some. I never did 108, but I did some prostrations in the past, and I enjoyed them. They also, you know, if you do yoga, it's a little easier. At my current condition with spinal stenosis, I don't think I could do it, but I would still find it interesting.
Yes, that raft has definitely crossed over to the other shore. Okay, so we're about ready to wrap up here. There were a few other questions I had, but we can save them for the next Zen Talking Heads episode. How would you describe your practice and put that in context of a monolithic Western Zen practice? Like I opened up with, what is Western Zen? Well, is there a Western Zen? And how does your own practice fit into that?
Are you looking more for a description of how we practice, or please clarify the question there, Quizmaster?
Quizmaster, yeah, I like that. In terms of, all right, so we started with what is Western Zen, and we had some, fairly broad definitions that essentially are, it's Zen practiced in the West, and it's evolved, according to causes and conditions and situations and relationships in the West. Do you think that your practice, as you do it, is different in any substantive way than anyone else's practice?
I think that my practice is in some ways different, perhaps, although not in any way that would matter in picking and choosing, just because, like everybody, I think in our Sangha, my background is pretty varied. And so I have a practice that's developed over a ridiculously long amount of time through a number of schools, and it's based on what has worked for me and starts with an actual daily liturgy form that I follow. But that also I've had to adapt as I've worked with sanghas with this group and with people that I work with here and there to make sure it's a practice that can be shared. But yeah, I think it, like all masters, really, if you go through the lineages again, Eastern or Western.
I think we just froze on Hangdal
I
there.
think that's low in the interpenetration of what we're doing.
Yeah, we're in Zoom hell for a second there.
Zoom hell?
We lost a lot of that Hangdal toward the
That probably wasn't important.
end.
Well,
Robert.
I think that Hangdal brought up something that was important, which is that even in any given specific lineage, while staying true to the basic principles and practices, every single teacher in the history of the lineages had their own special device or their own special way of teaching that they developed and passed on to their immediate students. So the lineage grew not just by mechanically passing on a very specific practice with no variations, but by adding something of the individual to it, of the individual teacher, and then passing on those skillful devices to their students. And then some of those would stick and some of them would fall away. So the lineage and the practice is kind of a living being that goes on and changes through the different individuals that master it or hope to master it. For myself, I have an eclectic background too, like Hangdal. I studied Tai Chi with 4 or 5 different teachers for a number of years. I was a yoga teacher for 15 years. I studied in a seminary and am ordained as an interfaith minister. I performed 1 wedding title in my career. and and I've also studied mindfulness meditation, the Vipassana style, as well as Zen. And so my practice is somewhat eclectic. I'm one of those individuals who's attracted to all the techniques, so I like to try to practice as many of them as I can. But my main practice is centered in koan, because when you have a koan, it's hard not to focus on it. You have to work with it until you go to the next one. So I've been working with koans for a number of years, and I'd say that's the core. But I really do enjoy also just sitting and seeing to what extent I'm able to just sit and be aware.
I guess my own practice is highly influenced by the path I took to Zen, which is through Western philosophy, existentialism, pragmatism, the Hellenistic philosophers of Stoicism, Epicureanism, and Pyrrhonism, which affect both the mind and the way you think about the world and the way you react to it and your ethical practices. And all of this informs everything I do. But I guess the daily practice is probably walking and Lojong more than anything. Those two, because it's all the time. Lojong is something I do all the time. And of course, sitting and all the other forms of meditation are useful, but those are the two that are always there for me.
Yeah, I would say in general that the concept of Western Zen is one of those generalizations that people sometimes fall into making, and it's an absurd statement. And beyond defining it as Zen as practiced in the West, it's just silly. There's no monolithic Asian Zen either. From country to country, you've got Chan, you've got San, you've got, Soto and Rinzai in Japan, and you've got Tien in Vietnam, and I'm sure going from one temple to the next in those places, as you've said, there's going to be differences, and there's going to be differences from teacher to student, and each student has his own individual background, and they bring something to the table, and then they leave other things behind. As Sangdal has been saying, it's what does the student need? What illness does the medicine, whatever it might be, need to treat? And with that, we'll wrap up tonight's special edition of Zen Talking Heads, and thank you for participating.
Many bows and prostrations.
108 of them. So, yeah, the knees don't do the prostration so well anymore. Anyway, let's go back and do another 15 minutes of seated meditation. Let's chant the Heart Sutra. Mahaprajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when practicing deeply the Prajna Paramita, perceives that all five skandhas are empty and is safe from all suffering and distress. Shariputra, form does not differ from emptiness. Emptiness does not differ from form. That which is form is emptiness. That which is emptiness, form. The same is true of feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. Shariputra, all dharmas are marked with emptiness. They do not appear or disappear, are not tainted or pure, do not increase or decrease. Therefore in emptiness, no form, no feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no color, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of mind, no realm of eyes, and so forth, until no realm of mind consciousness, no ignorance, and also no extinction of it, and so forth, until no old age and death, and also no extinction of them. Suffering, no origination, no stopping, no path, no cognition, also no attainment, with nothing to attain. The Bodhisattva depends on Prajna Paramita, and the mind is no hindrance. Without any hindrance, no fears exist. Far apart from every perverted view, one dwells in nirvana. In the three worlds, all Buddhas depend on Prajna Paramita and attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Therefore know that Prajna Paramita is the great transcendent mantra, is the great bright mantra, is the utmost mantra, is the supreme mantra, which is able to relieve all suffering and is true, not false. So proclaim the Prajna Paramita mantra. Proclaim the mantra which says Gate Gate Para Gate Parasangate Bodhi Swaha. Gate Gate Para Gate Parasangate Bodhi Swaha. Gate Gate Para Gate Parasangate Bodhi Swaha. And now we'll do our personal dedications of merit. I've got a couple people, and I will open it up to you to add in anyone you'd like. All sentient beings are one seamless body and pass quickly from birth to death. We remember those who cared for us and are gone, those who are ill, those who are at war, who are hungry and who are in pain. May they heal and have peace. We especially dedicate our service to Kevin, Joanne, and Bailey Sheridan, Mike Gingy Walker Wood, All those suffering from the violence of statism in Russia, Ukraine, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, West Bank, and Gaza, and all else in the world where strife is happening. And I'll open it up to you.
I'd like to dedicate merit to our beloved cat, Mystery, aka Boy Boy, who is in his last days after 17 years with us.
The James family, the Wilt family, and Rock.
All beings in 10 directions, subject to the greed, hatred, and delusions of themselves and others. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, Bodhisattva, Mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha Prajna Paramita. And we'll recite our faith and practice vow. I will never retreat and will be firm in my mind in this correct Dharma. I will escape from the samsaric cycle of birth and death and definitely will see my original face. I will be sure to inherit the life of insight of the Buddha and save all sentient beings. Brother Hangdal.
Infinite realms of light and dark convey the Buddha mind. Birds and trees and stars and we ourselves come forth in perfect harmony. We practice and recite this for all beings in grateful thanks to our many guides along the way.
We recite the 4 great bodhisattva vows. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to help them all. Delusions are countless. We vow to see through them all. Opportunities to awaken are infinite. We vow to embrace them all. The Buddha way is endless. We vow to embody it. Life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly by and opportunities to awaken are easily lost. Strive to realize your true nature and do not squander your time by night or day. And I'll extinguish the candles.